Spectacular has been the word most used to describe the opening ceremony of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games. Some 2,900 athletes entered into China's national stadium with excitement and anticipation. What tone was set for the Winter Games, and how have things changed since Beijing first took the world stage by storm as an Olympic host city in 2008? And what messages are going out this time from an even more confident and experienced China? To explore these ideas and more, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Dong Jing, a veteran Chinese sports commentator, formerly an official commentator for the 2008 Summer Olympic Games in Beijing, and Mike Bako, sports editor of dailynational.com, joining us from New York City. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So the games have been going on for almost a week now. Mike, let me go to you there. From what you're able to pick up from the media, from where you're able to get your information, what are your observations of the organization for the game so far?
Well, I think right now what you have to think about is just the fact that they're pulling off these games with so much consternation going into it, with daily COVID tests, with positivity rates on the uptick going up. When you think about the hundreds of thousands of tests that they've done and only a few hundred have turned out to be positive, that's on the plus side. On the negative side, some of these athletes have been testing positive, and it's turned some of these events into a bit of chaos in terms of some of their teams not knowing whether they're going to be able to compete, some of the conditions at the quarantine centers that they're being staged at. But in terms of the events going off, in terms of the internal popularity of the new venues, the repurposing of the Olympic Stadium, the Olympic opening ceremony going off, a spectacular opening ceremony, not quite like what was in 2008 because they didn't have 90,000 fans in there. Right now, the games are going off as planned, as best as possible. Right now, they're ticking off all the check marks in terms of how they wanted these to go.
All right, that's Mike, from the American perspective, from outside China perspective. Dong Jing, what are your understanding of the kind of aspects that Mike just mentioned, for instance, the testing, and how disruptive these tests might have been for the organization of the games? What do you know?
Well, very quickly, I'd like to remind that don't forget that the ownership of the Summer Games and the Winter Games are with the International Olympic Committee instead of the host city or country. And we are playing a supportive role in this entire process. And this is an International Olympic Games. And so, I mean, the consistency is there from Tokyo to Beijing. The COVID countermeasure, adopted by the playbooks are actually written by the same group of people from Tokyo to Beijing, and they have a lot of consistencies. It's not adopted by China or Beijing only, of course, with China's own situation and China's on-the-ground requirements into consideration. But basically, I think the rules are consistent. Of course, the situation from Delta to Omicron from last summer to this winter has been changing, and also the crowds that you will have to receive in Tokyo and to Beijing are different because most of the athletes back in Tokyo were Summer Games athletes, and now we have a different group of people, and also they are coming from different countries with different measures adopted from season to season now. So I'm not very surprised with some of the complaints or people who struggle to get used to the quarantine and other conditions. But basically, we should bear in mind that all the measures have been approved by an international group of medical experts.
So in terms of the scheduling of the events, the competitions, have they been able to go on as fairly much according to the schedule or disrupted? Dong, once again.
Yeah, I think if you heard the recent press conferences given by the International Committee, I think even the cases inside the closed loop or bubble has been declining and is well under control, and the organizers are pretty happy and content, although they wouldn't let their measures to get loose anymore. But I think, and also the bubble is playing significantly well, separating the cases from those outside of the closed loop, which was already done by Tokyo remarkably. Even back in Tokyo with more than 400 cases inside the bubble, and a lot of more cases in Tokyo, but they were separated, they were isolated, not related to each other. So I think in this regard, we are seeing something really positive, and at the same time, all the other competitions have been going on smoothly.
Mike, your response?
I mean, very much so. The games have been going on. There has been an interesting incident that went on with some of the skiing events, with the weather being as cold as it is. I believe it was the Belgium and the Swedish ski team did not want to race their events and do their downhills because it was so cold. That's one little hiccup. Again, you're playing with Mother Nature and you're playing with weather. That really can't be accounted for too much. But in terms of that closed loop system, yes, that is keeping people safe. The one thing from an athlete perspective, you lose some of the Olympic pageantry, if you will, of that Olympic village of commingling with other athletes. That's one caveat that they knew that they had to plan for. But really the other thing that our reporting has found, and that what we've heard from different athletes, is that some of their training regimens have been thrown off a bit, not being able to have in-between event training, to have some of your stretching, some of the other team activities that in a normal Olympic setting and a world championship setting, you do have those opportunities. So those are things that everyone should have been planning for, but it is a different reality once you actually come to the venue and things are going on. So from our reporting, those are the two little things that athletes have been concerned about in terms of their ability to adjust to this very rigid and very strict system, but it is a very rigid and very strict system to keep everyone safe.
It is a very special circumstance. I think we have to keep that in mind. But I do understand that athletes should be able to mingle with each other, right, Dong Jing, in terms of if you're in the closed loop, you should have that ability. If this is not a huge issue, I really do want to move on to what is very much in the news, not just in China, but also in the United States as well, which is the freestyle athlete Eileen Gu, by the name of Chinese, or Eileen Gu, if you will, her American name. She won the freestyle skiing big air for Team China, but she has, and Gu Eileen is her Chinese name. So while the medal is celebrated, she was also attacked or criticized by some in the United States for being ungrateful, or even some calling her traitor because she changed her nationality from American to Chinese in 2019 in order to be able to compete as part of Team China. So Dong Jing, what do you think of the kind of action that she has decided to take and the response to this action?
Actually, myself, I have been following Eileen for more than 2 years now, and I know all her stories, and I know that sometime in 2022, she would eventually face such questions once she decided and her family decided to get her Chinese citizenship. And and she had been well concentrated on competitions, international competitions, and trying to improve her own skills all the time. But she obviously has been working with her team to be prepared for all these questions being raised now, and the questions are still continuing. But myself being in the international journalistic circle for several decades now, and starting my very first overseas career in the United States, I was a little startled to hear that such remarks being made by a mainstream media, because international exchanges and athletes changing citizens have been so commonplace over the years, and sports should be the place where people feel freer to change where they want to stay and what they want to represent. So I was a little, I also realized that the deep division inside our world and society when as it reminds me of several decades ago when China was just the first opening up. It might be common for Chinese to to be surprised by a former Chinese ping pong player joining another country and represent them. And now such controversies are even quiet down here in China, but it suddenly emerged in the United States. I kind of struggle to
it's like a little bit of a deja vu in a different sense. Yeah. But Mike, help us understand whether this kind of sentiment is really fringe or, shared by a small group of people who are really not happy to see China doing better because of the help of, athletes like Gu Eileen, just as every other national team could do, or does it represent a general view by the general public?
I think you hit it on the head there when you said it is a small but vocal minority of people. I mean, this is what the Olympics are really all about. For someone to make a name for themselves on this national stage, you think about athletes who are much more celebrated, like Michaela Schifrin, who went into these games as the Golden Girl and a Sports Illustrated cover girl, and she's completely flamed out. So for Eileen Gu to be able to come to the games and rise to the occasion and have a record-breaking performance, thrust herself on the stage, it was inevitable that there was going to be some social media backlash. But this is a story that's really being embraced not only in China, but also in the U.S. We're always looking for what's the best story for winners, and she really does exemplify what's going on in these Olympic Games. So I think when it comes to social media backlash, I think it is some small but vocal minority of people. But overall, she's going to be really one of the stars that comes out of these games.
Dongjing, she did pull off some incredible stunts, even to the surprise of people who are close to her. What do you think of her performance and the kind of potential she has exemplified, not just on the field, on the slope, but also in handling all the criticism, her way of answering questions thrown at her at press conferences about how she can please everybody, not just in China, but in the United States. What do you think of her as a phenomenon? Do you think she is a phenomenon right now?
She is such a phenomenal figure now, personality inside China and outside of China. And even myself, having been following her over the years, I was very surprised to see what a courageous decision she made by herself to change to that title contending move, 16:20, the very last minute or even seconds, and she did it. I think luck was on her side to reward the most bravest person when she was already secured a bronze medal, at least in the top three, and she was so lucky. And she didn't hide her excitement by being, by screaming that at the excitement of being surprised that the very first ever attempt on that move succeeded, and at the same time she handled her relations with the relatively disappointing competitors on the ground, and also then in the post-competition press conferences. Yeah, I was truly amazed and impressed. I was unprepared for this.
I think a lot of people were. Finally, 20 seconds I'm going to give to Mike. Mike, do you think the American audience are seeing what they expected to see in terms of games, in terms of what China is like through these Olympics?
I think they weren't really sure what to expect. Obviously, an American audience really wants their American athletes to prevail. Someone like Nathan Chen bursting back onto the scene.
Yeah.
He did brilliantly. So they're really looking for that.
And he's of Chinese origin as well.
And as well, yes, correct. So I think they're able to experience the games through when an American athlete does well. It shines a bright light on the American athlete, but it also overall shows a spotlight on what Beijing has been able to accomplish, which has been a high degree of difficulty, and they pulled it off quite well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike Bako, joining us from New York City, and Dongjing here in the Chinese capital. We appreciate it. And, of course, we'll be keeping close watch on the situation and bring you more